Welcome to You Can't Say That in Court, a podcast by Rise Women's Legal Center. I'm Vicky Law.
And I'm Stephanie Melnick. We are your hosts in this conversation about survivors of violence navigating the BC family law system. We recognize that this system is colonial and causes harm to families, and that disproportionately impacts Indigenous people.
By speaking more widely about these harms, we hope to raise awareness about the challenges that survivors face as they navigate the colonial family law system. This podcast is our attempt to collectively identify the barriers and ask for positive changes to be made. Thank you for joining us. Our podcast series will discuss difficult topics such as gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, including physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. Please be aware that this is a thread that is woven throughout all the episodes, and we hope that you will take care of yourselves however you need.
Hello, welcome to episode 5, where we are continuing our conversations about the difficulties in defining family violence. If you've been with us before, we have dissected some of the myths around women and gender diverse folks in previous episodes, especially those who've experienced violence. And today we have a guest who knows all about these topics and also has some research experience to add to the conversation. We're very excited. Haley Hrymak is a research lawyer at Rise and a colleague of ours. Haley, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much, Stephanie. So my name's Haley Hrymak, and I'm a lawyer at Rise, and I've had the honor of conducting a lot of research for Rise over the past several years, including the report we're talking about today, Why Can't Everyone Just Get Along? How BC's family law system puts survivors in danger. And outside of Rise, I'm a PhD candidate at UBC, where my research focuses on economic abuse, and specifically how that's used within the child support system.
Yeah, awesome. You also have fantastic and impressive pastimes, and you seem to get so much more done than the rest of us. So we're just so happy to have you here today.
Thanks.
You have amazing insights into a lot of these complicated situations, and just jumping into the one report in particular, Why Can't Everyone Just Get Along? The title is something that comes up sometimes for discussion because it's a reference to how the courts sometimes don't understand the dynamics of violence and have this kind of expectation that people are going to work together and resolve their parenting issues after they separate, and kind of ask clients the question, why can't everyone just get along? And it's a very difficult message to hear. Yeah, so I think that that's a really on-point title for the body of research that's included in the report. Yeah, I had a thought about it. I think we've talked about this before, just with the power imbalance that often shows up in family court, and that requires some intervention from the courts, and that's why they can't, quote unquote, just get along. If everyone could get along, we wouldn't need the courts to intervene and try and provide that safe space to rebalance power. So, yeah, I have so many things to ask you, but let's start with all of the insights and the research you've done about systems that leave women and kids, in particular, more unsafe. What are some of those problems that you've discovered through your research?
Yeah, well, that's a great place to start talking about the title and this idea of, a lot of people when they separate can just go to Starbucks and invest $10 into nice drinks and sit down and kind of come up with an agreement about how they're going to split property, parenting, etc., and do that in a way that works for them. And obviously, when we're talking about power imbalances and a person who has safety concerns, that isn't necessarily an option for them. And this idea of like, what are you doing in court, and why would you, take all this time and energy and, try and litigate something when there's other options available. That kind of presumption is often missing, that many people are taken to court and don't have alternative options, and that is their only option. So that is one of the big problems. Lots of the ways that we describe problems in our research and issues actually all come down to some pretty foundational issues. And one of them is family violence isn't fully understood in terms of how common it is and also how serious it is. So that's one of the big issues.
I think in our previous episodes, we talk about family violence and the dynamics of power imbalance. And we kind of compare it to, dealing with a bully, right? Someone who is being bullied to stand up to the person who's doing the bullying sometimes need a third person to intervene because there is that huge power imbalance. And that I think that's what survivors are doing when they look to the court for help. Like they want someone to intervene so that they're not being harassed and being controlled by someone else anymore.
Yeah, and I like how, Haley, you identified that lots of people are pulled into the court system against their will. That, yeah, if there are two individuals who are on kind of equal footing when it comes to power, and they can go to Starbucks and come up with a good enough kind of agreement for separation and parenting and all of that. That is great, but a lot of times we have heard clients say that they wanted to sort it out themselves, but then the abusive party is the one that takes it into the court arena as well. So I appreciate you highlighting that, because it's not always two willing participants in the court system either.
Yeah, that's it. That's yeah, and just to add to that, you see people, there's this idea that people should be trying mediation all the time. And for sure, lots of people that works great for. And for many survivors, they try that and they'll go through and they'll spend thousands of dollars to get through a mediation. They'll come up with an agreement and the other side doesn't sign it. So, I mean, that's just an example of why people maybe are finding themselves in court is actually they have tried everything else and it didn't work because they're trying to negotiate with a bully.
Yeah, I've had so many clients where they're like, can we just keep this out of court? Can we not go to court? I don't want to go to court. Court is scary. And yes to all those things. At the same time, the client is like, why can't this person just be reasonable and give me the basic child support amount, right? Like, can we just go to mediation and have him do that? And I was like, well, it's kind of hard when we don't know his income and he needs to be forced to provide financial information so we can calculate what he owes you in child support. And unfortunately, you can't force someone to agree. Like that's the opposite of agreeing and providing consent. So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, we do a lot of heavy sighing, Haley.
Yeah,
And I
fair.
love I think we both, Vicky and I, are enjoying the podcast format because we are able to really get into some of the frustrations of how things don't work. But I know that you have a very positive spin on a lot of things. You have some positive findings out of the research that you did in Why Can't Everyone Just Get Along? And I love that you tend to frame it in what is possible, like what are the possibilities. Um, do you want to get into some of that?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for asking that because a lot of our research and projects highlight really big problems and it can be overwhelming and lead to heavy sighs. So I like to always bring it back and think about what is working. So within this project and in all our projects, I always ask people within interviews and focus groups, what, if anything, went well about your experience in the legal system? And just so people know, the survivors that we're interviewing for RISE projects, they meet certain criteria for our recruitment. So they're women or gender diverse folks living in BC who've experienced family violence and who've had a family law matter within the last 5 years. That's typically kind of the parameters. So I've these people are sharing, how difficult their family law matter was, how it was, potentially the most challenging and dangerous time of their life. And oftentimes they're still kind of going through that. And so then when I'm asking what, if anything, was positive, there's some really big themes that come out when people are describing that. And one that I'll share today is that many people tell me about the story or about a person. So they give me the name of someone and they tell me how this one person had such a big impact. And I've heard so many stories about a lot of different people, and that includes police officers, court clerks, transition house staff, family law lawyers, family law advocates, judges, sheriffs, and the list goes on. And these people are, often they believed the survivor, they've helped them, they've made them feel heard. But what people have conveyed is in many of these situations, they've actually saved their life and they've saved the life of their kids. And what sticks out to me and why it's so hopeful and positive is it's, for example, the stories I've heard about lawyers, it's not that these people are doing something that's really beyond their job. Like they aren't showing up at someone's house at night and driving them to a transition house or something. They are the people who really understand family violence and who are working with their client to do their best, navigating the legal system. And oftentimes they aren't getting their dream outcome, but they're still saying what a big difference that person has made. So when I think about all these big problems, I do, take a step back and think about all these amazing people doing incredible work and how it would be how we, are hoping for a system where that's the expectation rather than, unfortunately, the exception.
Yeah, that's
I
really
shouldn't,
lovely.
I don't know
Yeah.
if I should say exception. That's maybe not fair, but it's not a guarantee. I could say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people can relate to that too, where even if it's not in a legal setting, having just a key person really understand or be there for you makes such a huge difference. So in the context of family law, it truly could be anyone, but just having at least one person who's really just getting it.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. And when, I've been thinking a lot lately about how do we make things predictable because that's huge in terms of
Mm.
people deciding what's safest for them. And there's so much unpredictability in family law proceedings and outcomes because there's so much depends on who you're working with and who your matters are before and where you are and all of these factors. And that's part of why we advocate so strongly for mandatory education for everyone within the family law system because that helps to balance out this unpredictability of at least that everyone that you're appearing before totally understands coercive control. So that's just an example.
Yeah, not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but if there is one person, like an abusive opposing party, for example, who's involved in these processes or in the courtroom or the court proceedings, can we establish predictability? Is that even possible if there might be someone who's maliciously derailing the process? Or is this not something we should even talk about right now?
I mean, I think there's always an element of the legal system that's always unpredictable, and that's just how it is, right? Because there's a decision maker, and if it was 100% predictable, then like why don't we have robots do it then, right? Like just input
Right,
everything into
right.
like a robotic system and have it spit out a result, which is not the way that the legal system should work. But I think perhaps like Haley, to just jump on like your idea of predictability is that we do have a piece of legislation that focuses on family violence, that sets out how family violence should be interpreted and it should be applied when making certain decisions. And what's unfortunately happening right now is that not everyone is interpreting or applying that analysis the same way, or even at all sometimes, right? So
Right.
let's get to that one little step and make sure that everyone understands what family violence is. And this goes back to like the myths and stereotypes, right? Because I think if everyone understood the dynamics of power imbalance or how coercive controlling behavior is a pattern in certain relationships, there would be a more cohesive understanding of how to support survivors.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe I'll just talk a bit about um, how this shows up, how this misunderstanding shows up. And one of the big findings from Why Can't Everyone Just Get Along is that we know, unfortunately, that family law lawyers, are not necessarily always screening for family violence, which is something they're required to do, which is, try to identify and assess risk. And the reason that's so important is so that the lawyer can then work with the client to determine, the best path forward for them and accounting for any safety risks ongoing throughout the legal process, as well as many other reasons, including taking what positions you're going to take and all of those things. But within our project, we heard over and over again about lawyers not screening for family violence and, people telling me that my lawyers never asked me any questions about my experiences of violence. And also, we heard a lot of stories about how lawyers responded when clients did disclose violence. And of course, anytime someone makes that disclosure, it takes a lot to tell a lawyer that. And for many survivors, they said, I hadn't told anyone this before. I did this because I thought it would help me and my kids. And the way they reacted means that I'm just never, I never wanted to bring that up again. And so one of the quotes from a survivor in the project was, my lawyer told me I presented horribly in court and to let it go because nobody is going to believe you. And it sounds like you're exaggerating. So,
Yeah, this is a theme that came up in the last couple of episodes, also with our guest Steph Hodgson when she joined us, because we talked about screening. And again, it's shocking. It's so sad also to imagine someone really finding the courage finally to name and describe the violence they experienced, only to have a lawyer tell them it might play poorly, it won't go well in court, and it sounds like you're exaggerating, even though that is exactly what has happened to them, or even a downplay of what's happened. So it does tie into the title of the podcast. This is why we ended up picking, you can't say that in court, mostly because of the challenges in what can be considered credible in a court setting.
and I just also want to add that for some lawyers, they may be responding and not appreciating like the risks and that it's family violence and having these problematic responses. But a lot of other lawyers who really do get it are also trying to decide what is best for their client, knowing that unfortunately sometimes bringing allegations of family violence in court doesn't go well. And so, you have a lot of reasons that sometimes lawyers are deciding and with their client that potentially this isn't something that is in their benefit to bring forward, which is really sad. But all that to say that this myth that people are making all these false allegations, which is not founded. And what our research shows is that actually there's a lot of people who are being told to not bring up family violence in court.
Right.
And, one of the questions we asked people is, what did your lawyer say to you when they advised you about raising violence in court? And just, a few of the things that people said were, um, my lawyer advised me that judges don't tend to see stalking or minor assaults as egregious. Another person who had two lawyers said the first one wanted to make sure I was disclosing everything I could, but the second one kept telling me that it wasn't relevant. Another person said, my lawyer said judges don't like it, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of reasons. So I just give a few examples because another thing we hear a bit is that, it's just a few bad apples and that actually lawyers are doing 110%. And while I know and Rise acknowledges there's so many amazing family law lawyers in BC doing incredible work, the problems with screening for family violence are really systemic and I think kind of root back to this not appreciating how significant the problem is and having no mandatory education for lawyers on screening.
Right. It makes me
I
think of what you, oh, go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I was just gonna say that I also want to acknowledge like there are definitely lawyers like Haley said who do this and who understand, but for
Oh,
whatever
yeah.
reason in that proceeding at that time, it might not be the best legal strategy to bring it up, right? And
Mhm.
that's the that's what Rise has been educating lawyers on as well. Like family violence is a legal issue, like all your other legal issues, where whether it's like child support, spousal support, it's kind of the same thing. And there does need to be a more thoughtful strategy on how to address it because we know that the system doesn't appreciate it and or understand it to the very well, at least right now.
Yeah.
So for the lawyers who might be saying these things to their clients, yes, they're very well could be they don't understand violence at all, and or they do understand it, but because the system is so prohibitive and restrictive that it may not be the best scenario for their clients to bring up these very contentious issues.
Mhm.
Yeah, and even a nuance to that, I have worked with a couple of family lawyers who've said, and they are extremely well versed in the detailed complexities of family violence, but they have advised their clients not to bring it into the courtroom because it's just too hard on the client as well, that they are worried that their client won't be able to make it through a trial if the context and a bunch of the evidence that needs to be brought forward is about family violence, which is a really compassionate thing to do. But it does make me think that what both of you were saying earlier about predictability in the system, I think you're right, Vicky, that if the treatment of family violence was more standardized, more appreciated, more uh, yeah, more stable and predictable, that would probably take a lot of that would probably advance us. Yeah, a lot, because then we can support the lawyers who are willing to get into the complexity of presenting family violence and support their clients at the same time because they know that there's a reasonably predictable response from the courts. So yeah, that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, and I just to add a bit of positive hope with the predictability piece, like you've said, Vicky, people are giving that advice in part because of they're not sure what will happen in court. And I've been reading more case law right now in the past several months than I ever have before. And I have to, give a shout out that a lot of judgments are incredible and really, we're reading about really positive outcomes. Of course, we don't know the whole situation just reading a case, but to say that for some people bringing up family violence results in the orders that they are seeking and they're getting close to what they're asking for, and it's being
Mhm.
handled in this way that's you know makes you brings warmth to your heart and smiles to our faces. So just to say that of course that is possible. That the problem and why it's such a systemic issue is that, like we've been talking about, that's not a guarantee, and there are just so many problems with having those positive results.
Mhm. I think one of the reasons there isn't a guarantee is because sometimes stereotypes about what it means to be a woman or a mother can impact the outcomes, and that is often kind of blindsiding for someone who is looking for treatment of their specific circumstances to be kind of put into this cookie cutter mold, which has no foundation. It's just truly a stereotype or a myth about behavior and what is expected. Yeah, I know there's a thread of myths and stereotypes through your research as well. More than just a thread, it's actually like heavy underlining in a lot of the research and super problematic. From your experience and everything you've heard and learned, what do you think are some of the most harmful myths and stereotypes in a court setting?
Well, one of them for sure is that women are vindictive and that they, don't want dads to see their kids. And part of being vindictive and part of that whole myth is that they're, out for money, that they'll make anything up just to try and get ahead. And this is really attached to this idea that women aren't credible, which has a long, long history, including, at one point women weren't allowed to testify against their husbands. And so that's probably one of the most problematic, and you see it play out in a lot of different ways, including, this idea that anyone making an allegation of family violence kind of has this higher burden to that they have to live
Right.
up to, and they that's what I would say, but is one of them anyways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, is there anything else that you want to share? Because I can't believe we're getting low on time already, but any last thoughts or any other myths or stereotypes that you really wanted to underline? Because I feel like we're going to have you back though. That we could just keep talking for hours at this point.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, I'd love to come back. I'll just finish the one myth I mentioned about women not wanting their dads to see their kids. What I
Yeah,
hear from
yeah.
survivors all the time is how much they want for the other party. Almost everyone we've interviewed is talking about the dad, and how they really want the dad to be a part of the child's life, and they want, there to be parenting time for the child to be able to see them and talk to them and have some kind of relationship. It's not that
Mhm.
they're out just trying to make it so this person never gets to speak to their kid. There's lots of different variations of what women want, but what everyone wants is for there to be a safe parenting arrangement. And that's I think that it's really anytime that mothers are asking for some parameters around safety for them and their kids in parenting time, it's immediately treated with suspicion,
Mm.
and it's kind of or it's often treated as suspicion. And there's again this myth that they aren't credible, that they're making it up, that they're trying to gain something, but what they're always, putting first is the safety of their kids.
Right. Yeah, that's a really excellent thing to underline. Um, you have so much detailed analysis in your report. So, Vicky, we're going to link that in show notes, right? The executive summary as well as the full report. Yeah, there's some pretty involved discussion about myths and stereotypes in there in one of the sections, which is really, really useful, I think, for furthering the conversation. So yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful talking with you. I'm so glad you joined us today, Haley.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. In the next episode, Vicky and I are going to talk to another one of our colleagues at Rise. Vandana is a lawyer who will help us continue the conversation about myths and stereotypes, and specifically how it's being addressed by the courts in the context of a specific court proceeding. I think that one's going to be really interesting as we just dive deeper into all of these themes. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye. Everything that we have said today is not legal advice. If you or someone you know needs legal advice, please consult with a lawyer. We want to acknowledge that this podcast would not be possible without the generous contribution by Women and Gender Equality Canada, Femmes et Égalité des Genres Canada.